White balance, good afternoon. I know this was probably short notice for some of you. We try to give you as much lead time as humanly possible. Hard to believe it's been almost a year. We're on the cusp of a year to the date of the demonstrations that we were experiencing last September. Over the course of that year, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of questions, a lot of recommendations. Somebody grabbed me the other day and said, God golly, it's got to be frustrating to have so many people Monday morning quarterbacking this thing almost a year out. And I don't think that could be further from the truth. The chief will attest to the fact that any time that any of our officers are involved in something so monumental when it comes to a use of force situation, there ought to be scrutiny, there ought to be questions, there ought to be recommendations. Recently, we received some really important recommendations from the Citizens Review Board. Those were received earlier this week, and we reviewed them carefully. Those were sent out to your desks, what those specific recommendations were and what our responses were to them. I want to set the table a little bit, just in the interest of full disclosure concerning that report. That wasn't solely the only information that was involved in that report or contained in that report that you saw. There was a number of other things in that report that spoke specifically to personnel matters when it came to specific officers. Legally, we can't get into any of that kind of territory when it comes to personnel matters, identifying specific officers. What we could do, however, is speak about specific recommendations to policy, to training, to directives, standard operating procedures, and that's exactly what we addressed in our responses, and that's exactly what Chief Putney is going to do in just a couple of minutes. So I just wanted to kind of set the table there for you a little bit, let you know some of the limits that we were working with as we get this thing unfolded. When he's through discussing what our responses are, he'd be more than happy to go ahead and do his best to get some of those questions answered. So appreciate your patience, appreciate your turnout, and I want to introduce Police Chief Putney.
Afternoon. First of all, let's give due deference to this ordeal that has been a difficult one for us as a community, as a city as a whole. Thoughts and prayers remain with the Scott family, as with the Vincent family, and with all the families impacted, because as a community we went through a lot last fall. I don't want that to be missed in all the legalese and the recommendations and the responses and all. Truly, that's heartfelt and sincere. I do believe, though, we as a community can charge a new course forward that is much improved as a community and for us here at CMPD as an agency. To that end, I'd like to thank the CRB, Citizens Review Board. These are citizens who sacrifice a lot of time, energy, and effort to bring forth some recommendations that I think can make us better as an organization. We're a learning organization. We want to continue to improve, and I think these valuable recommendations from some people who were between a rock and a hard place, I think they came through for us as an agency and as a community. So my hat's off to them. Although the CRB acknowledges that they're not experts in police tactics, they gave us some recommendations that I think can reasonably be expected to be thoroughly evaluated, and those that are pertinent to making us better, implemented. I have to remind everybody that the SBI, the State Bureau of Investigations, did a thorough and independent, objective investigation in this case. That case was turned over to the district attorney for review, and then the determination that the shooting itself was legal and justified. I've said multiple times here at CMPD, we can meet the legal standard, but our standards are higher. Thus, the recommendations from the CRB, I think, demonstrate the high standards that we have as a community of our policing agency. So let's jump right into it. The first recommendation, and we broke it up into three because the fourth was a foregone conclusion. The fourth was the CRB wanted us to release as much as we could, especially the recommendations. So hats off to them again. However, that was a foregone conclusion. As soon as our attorneys, as much as you can, trust everything you get from attorneys, as soon as they assured me that we were not breaking the law, the decision was made to release these. So the first response, the first recommendation talks about vehicle takedowns and breaching of windows. It's really about tactics. And as always, we're going to review tactics. What we use the vehicle takedown tactic for is to swiftly block the path of a vehicle, a suspect vehicle, so that we can keep it from leaving the scene. Also, there's an element of surprise, and its intent is to gain compliance so that officers can approach safely, get the doors unlocked, and get the person under control. When confronted with a non-compliant armed subject, it becomes a bit trickier. Not only do you have to worry about the tactical approach, you also have to worry about positioning and everything else to come into play. So keep in mind, the longer one of these situations goes on, the longer an armed person is non-compliant, the more dangerous that encounter can be. And also keep in mind, an officer never really knows what a subject is thinking. Unfortunately, we don't have the latitude and the luxury of getting inside somebody's head. So when they see an armed, non-compliant subject, a lot of times they may believe that that non-compliance could lead to a potential assault on them or members of the public. So the recommendation also talks about comprehensively evaluating our scenario-based training. That's essential to effective policing. We're going to continue to do so and do so quite vigorously. Inserting de-escalation tactics is another big piece that came out of this recommendation, especially in our scenario-based training. And that's absolutely how we are conducting our training and intend to do so even more intently moving forward. Lastly, though, the breaching of the window, the CRB wants us to give additional guidance to our officers. And obviously, that's not a recommendation that we take lightly, and it is something that we're reviewing to make sure we can accommodate that. I think the more guidance you can give your officers within policies and practice, the better you can be as an organization. Another one of their recommendations is about de-escalation tactics. And I know you're tired of hearing me talk about it, but we've done a block of instruction already about last year about de-escalation, just an introductory 2-hour block. Plus, it was part of our tactical training that all of our officers, all of our sworn staff had to go through. That's going to continue. But we'll also need to assess the effectiveness, making sure we're improving decision-making. And that's a part of how we move forward based on this recommendation. Again, an armed, non-compliant subject is probably the most difficult encounter an officer is going to experience. And make no mistake, a handgun in an encounter such as that is a game changer. A gun is a game changer. We train and rely on de-escalation methods throughout our training, but there's no directive that can be so specific to account for every possible scenario. So the recommendation is that we evaluate scenarios and try to come up with new ones, and that's absolutely what we're going to do. The CRB also recommends that we evaluate comprehensively all of our policies. And as a member of CALEA, accreditation agency that oversees many agencies across the country, we have to do so and will continue to do so to meet that recommendation. Another big one under that topic is around making sure all of our officers have all available less lethal options available when we approach on a vehicle takedown. So that is another good recommendation that we are really looking forward to implementing, because if applied appropriately, we think now the officers have a litany of options. But I'll tell you, in an armed encounter, make no mistake, in an armed encounter where a subject is non-compliant, until we can resolve the immediate threat that that gun poses, all de-escalation tactics become irrelevant. If we can't get compliance and you don't cooperate and it's an armed encounter, lives are in jeopardy. Lives are definitely in jeopardy. Finally, the recommendation around reaction time, action versus reaction. This has been a proposed thought for the longest. I know for at least 2 decades, maybe longer. And it is that an officer reacts slower than a suspect whose arm acts if drawing the weapon to fire around at the officer, meaning my reaction time has to be slower because you know exactly what you're going to do, and I can't predict it. So it takes me longer to react to what you're doing. We've done a lot of scenarios relative to that. We've done a lot of unscientific experiments that give us some confidence that that is indeed valid. But based on what we're getting from the CRB, and it's a very good recommendation, we need to validate that scientifically. Our community deserves no less. So we're going to seek to have an independent party with expertise in this area validate whether or not our reaction time can match the action time of an armed encounter of a subject who draws a weapon and maybe fires a shot. So those are the recommendations. Those are our responses and our intent to move forward to see all of those which we can implement that are feasible to do so. We want to make sure that everybody understands we get the fact that the community needs to assess and evaluate everything we do. We understand that. Actually, we embrace it. The work of the CRB cannot be emphasized enough. Just keep in mind, too, the community plays a role in that standard. I talked about the legal standard. There's also a community standard. We intend to meet both. Lastly, I just want to say that the CRB has done their job to make sure we're held accountable. They've made recommendations that they believe can make us a better agency, and now it's up to us to evaluate those and implement those that actually accomplish that. What are your questions?
Chief, how does this impact future training?
I think it's already impacted some of our training. Some of the recommendations are right in line with some of the things we wanted to explore and improve upon. A big one for us is we're talking about transparency and what we captured. The body-worn camera for all tactical is different, already implemented. We don't have to wait for somebody else to give us that recommendation. We know it's needed. The need for more specific training in scenarios. We've been doing scenario training for a while, but now the validation is key as well. So those kinds of things. And again, I don't know that you're going to see every subtle change, but I think validating and giving people more confidence in those tactics helps us become better, and I think gives the community some comfort.
Chief, it sounds like the recommendations really are. Let's take a look again at how you approach these things. And you talked about vehicle takedowns. Are there specific, narrow kind of scenario?
Yes.
Walk me through a little bit more. Is it, you talk about breaching the window, breaking the window, opening the door? What exactly are we talking about?
Yes, all of it. From the tactical approach to basically keep the vehicle from fleeing and potentially running over officers or other community members as they flee. Just making sure that is still a valid approach to take, but also, more importantly, about the breaching of the window. How do we do so most effectively so that we're safe and we're not creating a situation that brings out an outcome that we might have been able to prevent otherwise. But ultimately, it's just making sure we're doing it as best we can, because what is very important when we talk about a technique, be it breach or otherwise, if that's not working, what's your next step? And that's what we're getting to. Is your next step to tactically retreat, get cover, and try to verbally gain compliance? If you can do so safely, those are the kinds of things that we're looking at relative to that in particular. That's that tactic in particular.
Chief, if the same, this may be an impossible question.
Probably.
If the same circumstances were to occur later this afternoon, based on the changes that you say you've already started to make, would the outcome have been the same?
Listen, we can talk hypotheticals all day, but here's what I'll tell you. Make no mistake, in an armed encounter, we have very limited options. We can talk crisis intervention training, we can talk de-escalation, we can talk anything that you might think of. But until it's no longer an armed encounter where our lives and the lives of other people are in jeopardy, there is no opportunity for de-escalation. Once we get cooperation and the person puts the gun down, we can communicate, we can de-escalate. Even in SWAT situations, once it's no longer an armed threat, an armed, imminent, lethal threat, we get positive resolutions. We get people out, we save lives. That's what it's going to take. So to manipulate around the edges, I think is ineffective, and is not really focused on the essence of the issue here. And the issue is, in an armed encounter, a gun is a game changer. It's just that simple. If we can get beyond that, I think we have a lot of better outcomes. And I've been preaching that for well over 2 years.
Chief, could there have been more people on the scene, though? Would that have helped you better control the scene if more people had been
Does that,
sent?
well, the way I'd answer that is to ask this question. Does that take away the armed threat that the officers encountered? No.
It seemed like there was some time there when you all just detected a man with a gun to bring in more troops before we made a move.
It's not a matter of how many troops we had. We had plenty of troops there, in my humble opinion. Having more is not going to change an outcome. No, sir. What changes an outcome is that armed, imminent, lethal threat. That's really the game changer. Yes, sir.
So the less lethal options part of this?
Yes.
Does that even apply when you're talking about someone who is non-compliant and also armed?
That is our problem, and that is what people don't want to understand or really appreciate. But in an armed encounter, less lethal options are really moot, unless I don't perceive it as a threat. But again, that's going to be the individual officer who's held to that objective, reasonable standard to decide. A policy or a tactic is not going to overcome that legal justification. That legal justification. Please.
A follow-up to that would be, what less lethal options are you all looking at as part of that?
Sure.
response?
The big one is what we're doing right now, communicating. If we can get past if we can get in a hypothetical, if I encounter you, you're armed, I see you as an imminent lethal threat, you put the gun down, I'm gonna talk your ears off. That's one, communication, right? The other thing is the tactical approach and how we can do so as safely as possible for all parties. And there are other things that we're looking at that our tactical experts are explaining that are under consideration about, like SWAT has a shield that we use when we're encountering people, things that might give us additional safety measures so that then other options are available. But I'm telling you, none of that's going to overcome that imminent lethal threat. De-escalation happens after we've overcome that. Yes, sir.
Chief, there's been some discussion among the State Coalition and some other groups about getting legislative approval to expanding the powers of the CRB, such as subpoena power, independent investigative and disciplinary authority. Does the department have any position on those possibilities?
Yes, we do. 33% of them were all in. Subpoena power. Subpoena power. Discipline and investigation is our job. And if I'm not thoroughly investigating and holding our people accountable, that's my fault. I don't want to defer that responsibility to anybody else. I think, we've come up with a system that's pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. And then having an appeals process for the community to the CRB, the way it worked this time, we have a pretty good system in place. So to give up and relinquish a responsibility that comes with this job, I'm not willing to do that, but I am willing to improve. So subpoena power to get everybody there to give the CRB everything they need, 100% behind that. Yes, sir.
Okay, Chief, I'm a little slow, forgive me, I'm getting old.
So am I, sir.
Yeah, not quite as old, but anyway, the last one you talked about, the reaction time.
Yes.
It makes sense, those of us who watch sports, I mean, the guy who's catching the ball, he knows what he's going to do before the guy trying to defend it. And is that essentially what we're talking about? And just tell me what specifically you're looking at in terms of the reaction time piece of it.
Mainly it is, and we've replicated quite a few times, it is me having a weapon and let's say I have it in my hand, me drawing it to fire a simunition at you before you can draw your weapon and stop my lethal threat. That is it. My ability to react with what I'm seeing you do prior to you being able to do it. And then having that scientifically validated is what we're trying to do.
It seems pretty obvious. You know what you're...
Seems very realistic, yes, sir, but the science matters.
Basically, you're going to try to validate that that is in fact.
Yes. What I feel, what I've been told, what I've seen is important, but what we can prove is more so, and that's what we're trying to get to.
Chief, you're saying if someone has a gun, and I guess I'm just trying to get it
Yes,
clear.
ma'am.
When you're saying de-escalation, you don't have many options, but in the meantime, what will officers be? Will they be trying to talk them down to them? Will they be using the, the tasers, or what will they be doing if you're saying a few options?
I'm not understanding your question.
No, if you're
So-
saying they have few options.
Right. In an
Someone
armed
has-
encounter
in an
that I
armed
think
encounter.
you might shoot me right now? Is that what
Or
you're?
if someone has a gun, you don't know if they're gonna shoot you, or if they have a gun.
Okay, it's impossible to know. Let me just start there. If you have a gun and I'm telling you, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun, I'm giving you loud verbal commands to drop the gun because you're putting my life in jeopardy right now. Your question is exactly what? This is where you fill in for me. I'm not understanding what your question is relative to that situation.
But I guess what people are saying is, will the officers be saying, okay, the next step is to use the taser? The next step is to,
No,
until they put the gun
I get
down.
your confusion. Let me just tell you this. We're already saying put the gun down. We will continue to say put the gun down. Once that happens, the communication can start and all the other de-escalation. And even, to your question, less lethal options, taser, OC, even hands. All of that are available to me once we get a subject to put that weapon down. Prior to that, I can lose my life, so can anybody else in that area. So a taser is in effect. What am I going to do? If I tase you and you got the gun pointed, I might have just caused that reaction that you did that made you shoot someone. Make sense? So when the weapon's out of play, boom, de-escalation, communication, all of that is triggered. That's what I'm saying. Our struggle is, how do you overcome that imminent lethal threat when a life is in jeopardy? And I can't tell you OC spray or, prayer or, whatever else is going to overcome that threat right now. And that split second is what people move away from. That's where we have to start on the legal standard. And once we get beyond that and the person is unarmed, we do a fantastic job of de-escalating and communicating.
So the family pushed for this CRB review. Have you shared your response with them? Has the department reached out to them about the response to?
I'm not sure. Generally what happens is they will get the information, and I'm not sure that, I know I didn't deliver it, but our people take care of that kind of thing. And then I think what has happened though is the CRB has already delivered their copy of the recommendations to them, but I haven't talked about this with them in any degree, no.
Would you share the full breadth? I mean, there was only so much you could share with us. Probably.
I gave you all the recommendations. I gave you all I can give you right now legally. Yes.
Chief, as we get towards this...
But the family got everything. Yes, sir.
As we get towards next week, there are a lot of planned observances in the community. What's your expectation as far as people maintaining order and like? Because there's going to be a lot of emotions.
Sure. We're okay with emotion. We're okay with legal protest. We're not okay with rioting. We're not okay with violence. So what I anticipate is there will be a lot of emotion, a lot of lawful protests, and that's fine. Anything else, we're going to have to address it. So,
Chief, are you planning to reach out to the Scott family, just, to talk to them about the recommendations? Do you have
no, I have no intent to reach out to talk about the recommendations. They've gotten everything that's in them. They've gotten the whole packet. They can digest that. They have legal counsel, and sometimes me being overly compassionate hurts us in other areas. Therefore, my practice is I reach out to you right after it happens. We talk on a human level, and then I move away and let you heal. That's how I intend to continue. All right?
Okay, we'll take one more, and then
Yes,
we'll,
I think Rob said this earlier, but when did you guys get these recommendations sent to you?
I think we received them, close of business on Tuesday. Yes, sir, Tuesday. So, good job, Chief. You turned it around pretty quickly and got as much information to us as you could. Ultimately, I wish we could be faster in everything we do. I want to be right, not fast. So, I think giving it to you today is about as good as we can get. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.